Hello, I'm Bruce Merrifield, and if you watch all of the modules in this series, you're going to be sick of me by the time I finish. But I did want to start you off with a little bit of a pep talk. What I am going to try to do through this video series, all these modules, is I'm going to try to turn you on to the great game of business. You know, we all play games for fun, but I have to tell you, if you know the rules, the strategies, and how to keep score of the business game, and you know what's in it for you, there's not a better game out there. You know, if you think of all the golf addicts, you know, business addicts put those guys to shame. So in my first slide here, I want to show you some of the things we're going to touch upon. First of all, I want to review a lot of sort of assumptions and guidelines about what makes great companies great. So if you understand the success rules, then you know that, hey, you could win too. But to go from wherever we are as a company to wherever we want to be, we need certain strategies for improvement. It's not easy to say, okay, I want to be, go from being a hack to a world-class athlete, for example, either in sports or business. So we need a lot of strategies that can help us do that. Along the way, we're going to need a lot of data to know how we're doing, how we're progressing, and so forth, which makes the company a lot more fun place. Because if you don't get feedback for how not just your department's doing, but the processes that cut through your department, how your profit center is doing, how your whole company is doing, and how it's improving, it becomes a very interesting situation. It's also important to know what has to be done to make the company a very safe, interesting, exciting learning environment. Because a lot of learning isn't so much fun. You know, you try something, you make a mistake, and you get chewed out for it. That can't be. We've got to figure out how to change that. And modules will follow that will do that for you. But I suppose the thing that you might really want to dwell on or think about is, if you live in a major city and you have professional sports teams, you know how excited the city gets when the team makes the finals of, baseball, the World Series, or the NBA, or they're going for the Stanley Cup in hockey, Super Bowl. People go nuts. But in retrospect, I think it's sort of sad that there are so many adults that are winning, they're just living and dying for 50, 60 years, hoping their team is going to make it to the Super Bowl. They're excited just because these guys happen to have their city's name on their jerseys. And we're not on the team, and we're not getting paid Super Bowl bonuses or getting rings. But every day, you are on a team at your company, and if your company could become a championship team, the best at what it does, so you have high growth, high profitability, you have maximum wages for what you're doing, you've got bragging rights. That's like being on a world championship team every day and enjoying the fruits of that too. So that's kind of what it's all about. We want to try to figure out how to get to that space and that reality. Now, to do it, we've got to bring along all the stakeholders in the business. So I want to introduce you to an idea called stakeholder symmetry or balance. And it turns out that in every business, there are at least 4 stakeholders, groups. These are people who have a vested interest in how well the company does. So for example, one group are employees. They say, I'm concerned about the company because I want job security, I want job growth, I want premium wages for what I'm doing, I like good benefits, I like a little educational stimulation. There's a lot of stuff I hope I could get out of the company. It's sort of my dream machine, or I wish it was anyway. Then there are customers, and customers are saying, I need reliable service. I've got to get stuff when I need it. If I don't, my place shuts down. Downtime, critical problems happen. I'm dependent on not only that great service, but I want the best economic value I can get because I need to make a buck over here, and I can't be overpaying for lousy service. Another group are suppliers. They're dying to sell the company more stuff, but they also want to be paid on time. And you can't buy more stuff from them if you don't grow faster in the industry, and you can't pay them on time if the company doesn't make dough, put it back in the business to have the working capital to pay the suppliers back. And lastly, and not least, they're the shareholders. They've put a lot of money over time into the company, and they'd like a return on their investment for that. So everybody is saying, I want more, and in the middle is this tiny little thing called profit after tax, which you will learn through this video, if you didn't know already, is minuscule in most of your companies. And so if any one stakeholder says, I want more, but I don't want to put something in, the profit after tax diminishes and the whole game shuts down for everybody. Because if there's no company, every one of these stakeholders has lost something. So the trick is, how do we take care of this company, which is a commonwealth system for all stakeholders, and not fight over a static little profit pie, but how do we figure out how to grow the whole ecosystem they're part of in a much more productive, profitable way so all stakeholders can get premium returns on investment. If you doubt that this can happen, just think about Federal Express and UPS. You know, UPS is a company that went from nothing back in 1911 to $40 billion in sales or whatever it is today, and for most of that time it was a privately held business. So it was able to make so much money, profit after tax, it was able to buy fleets of trucks and jets and distribution centers. They financed all of that with profits made in the business, reinvested back in there. If you look at the employees, they do great. Nobody gets paid better wages than UPS employees, and they got their pride. They work for the tightest ship in the industry, and you don't see a lot of turnover from those jobs. And the customers love them. Gosh, there are distribution companies out there that make small and precious products per pound. They ship 100% of their product via UPS. If UPS goes down, it's a national emergency because they give such reliable service at affordable prices, we can't afford not to use them. And of course, if you were a supplier to UPS, if they grow from 0 to 40 billion, wouldn't you like that truck account? Wouldn't you like that gasoline account? Wouldn't you like that shipping product label printing sort of business? I mean, all the suppliers to UPS have loved it. McDonald's is the same story. If you go and look at the rocket ride they were all through the 60s and 70s and 80s, boy, there were a lot of stakeholders that did just fabulously off that company. So there are service businesses out there that have figured out how to rethink the whole ecosystem they're part of to make it a high-performance ecosystem that feeds all the shareholders, or stakeholders, I should say, in a very generous manner. This next slide sort of shows the flow of the modules that you're going to go through. Module 2 has about a dozen, or Section 2 has about a dozen modules in it, and they're pretty much about the ABCs of capitalism and the ABCs of financial management and how to be financially literate and understand the numbers and what they mean and why they got to be better and so forth. In Section 3, I go into a lot of high-performance assumptions. In other words, 90% of all the distribution companies out there are not doing so well. In fact, the top 10% are doing about 5 to 6 times better. And trust me, the employees of those places aren't working 5 to 6 times harder. It's just a smarter, better situation. So what are the secrets of the high performers as far as their assumptions about who to sell and how to sell them and how do you create basic service brilliance, etc. When we get to Section 4, all those modules are about basically defining, measuring, achieving, selling, getting paid for, leveraging perfect service. Because everybody says, sure, 0 errors, 100% on-time delivery, highest fill rates around, those are nice things. They're not easy to achieve. If they were, everybody do them. So that's a very how-to section. And then we get to Section 5, I offer a number of ideas that will help you learn how to learn and keep your progress going. Because when you go from one situation to another, there are a lot of ways that you could get knocked off the path of the road, and you want to stay on the road. So I'm going to give you a lot of tools there to keep you on the road to a higher performing business situation where all stakeholders are going to win. Another organizing model is what I call the 5 strategic steps. There are a number of modules that address Roman numeral 1, where we're saying, let's not just hire achievers, let's find the hidden achievers that are already on the payroll and help them turn on by creating a high-performance environment that not only attracts them and keeps them, but induces people to turn on and get excited and be all that they can be. If we can do that, then we can make basic service brilliance and extra services as needed happen, which is our ticket for going out and partnering the very best customers who themselves are growing faster than their industries, more profitably so, because if we hook up to them, they'll grow us and pay their bills on time, which is a good thing to do. If we can make 1, 2, and 3 happen, then we'll be able to have the extra time and talent and treasure and credibility with our business partners, suppliers, customers, to make new living edge, leading edge kinds of things happen, because they're going to come to us first because we're the paragon, we're the best player out there. And if these things happen, then we can have a sustainable growth story for a long, long time. So in summary, there's a lot of educational stuff ahead. And I just have to ask basically for a commitment from you. If you give me the patience and perseverance to get through this and digest it and talk about it and review it, then I think I'll guarantee that you will be able as a team to go out there and make significant new breakthrough things happen for where you're working and turn the game of business into a wonderfully productive, profitable, and fun experience for everybody at the company. Thanks. This is the beginning of section 2 of the video, which the overall title is basically the effect of what's in it for me, the average frontline service employee at a distribution company. And we can talk about a lot of change we need to do in our business, but maybe the best thing to do is first zoom right in and focus just on you and what you expect from a job, what you expect from an employer. And if you went out and asked the average employee what they would expect, you would typically get a list that would look something like this, the following. First of all, they'd say, you know, I want a good wage for my job. But if I said, press a little further, so what's a good wage? You know, the average guy would say, well, it's about 107% of what the average wage is for that job niche. Now, every job in a distribution center is a commodity job in the sense that there are lots of warehouse people in town, there's lots of drivers in town, there are lots of inside salespeople, lots of distribution center managers in town. And there's a wage for these different jobs. And maybe there's a mythical average for that, and which is 100. So a little bit better than average would be a good thing. Of course, the next question is, well, what's a premium wage for my job? Maybe that would be pretty good. Second thing is, well, yeah, and not only do I want a good wage, I would like to have a real raise. I want to get ahead in life, so at the end of the year, if I got a raise that beat inflation and taxes, so I had more after-tax real spending power, I'd like that. And then I understand that medical insurance costs keep going up, and so the company keeps raising my copay, raising my deductible, raising my contribution per my kid each year, and it would be really great if kind of the company just ate that. So in theory, I'm still net ahead as far as spending power. A third thing that I might like is job security. You know, it's a good job right now, I'm getting good wages, etc., but how do I know it's going to last forever, or certainly at least for the foreseeable future? You know, I would like to live my life in a stable way. I'd like to have a mortgage, or know I could pay my rent on a regular basis, my car payments. So I want to make sure I've got a secure job stream income. And what can the company do to give me some hope that maybe just besides a secure job, if I were so inclined, not necessarily, but so inclined that, you know, if I showed up early, stayed a little bit late, learned, and, you know, did well, that I would be promotable. The company is kind of expanding, and so there are opportunities to promote from within. That would be great. Then my job is not just a job, it could be a career. The next thing might be, well, gee, I guess if I were to grow and have a chance for more responsibility, I would need a little bit of educational stimulation. And that's an optimal decision. Some people want less, some people want more. But at least I would like some. And then it would be fun to know just how I'm doing. A lot of times what I'm doing is kind of in a vacuum. I don't know if I'm doing a good job, bad job, etc. So a game is more fun if you can just know the score. If you're bowling and there's a curtain in front of the pins, and you roll the ball down the middle of the alley and it disappears under the curtain, and you hear all this noise and the boss says, just keep rolling them down the middle of the alley, it's not as much fun as if you can actually see the pins and know the score and what you can do to improve. And there are different levels of score. How I'm doing at my job, how our department's doing, how my service process might be doing, how our branch or profit center is doing, how the whole company is doing. Those are all interesting things in keeping score of the game of business. Now, if you think about all of these wishes and you add them up, you think, well, whoa, this adds up to a lot of money. What's the annual cost per employee? Just starting with giving a real raise of 2-3% in a low inflation environment. On top of that, medical benefits are creeping up. Well, they're going up quite a bit right now, but and you add the other things in, I'm going to guess you'd be looking at a 5, 6, 7% increase per year per employee as far as the cost of an employee. And the question is, where's the company going to get the money to afford this? And right away people say, well, you know, the company's rich. I think the shareholders, the CEO kind of has chests of gold in his office. He should share some of that with me. Another thought might be, well, maybe the company is making enormous profits. Sears Roebuck did a survey of sales associates back in 1993, and they asked them, well, when we sell $1 of goods, how much of that dollar goes to the profit line? The average answer was 45%, or 45 cents on the dollar, when in fact at the time it was only 1.7% before Sears paid its taxes to the city, state, federal government, which wipes out about half of that 1.7. So you think, oh, maybe there aren't as much profits as I thought. But a third solution might be, well, maybe if there aren't chests of gold, and maybe if the company isn't as profitable as I thought it was, and we'll take a look at that in later modules, then maybe it's possible that if we all work smarter, not harder, if we all work smarter as far as how we pursued our business, we could increase the productivity per employee, and out of that productivity we could afford not just real wage increases, but perhaps premium wages supported by the premium productivity. But now we're talking about everybody being responsible for how well the company does in growing employee productivity. Now, what's the best way of measuring employee productivity? In distribution, you sell stuff for $1, and then you turn around and take about, in durable goods distribution channels, about 75 cents of that dollar, and you pay it to the suppliers. So it turns out the durable goods distributor is only working on a markup or a gross margin of 25%. Let's take a look at a typical P&L statement for a durable goods distributor. Let's assume a company is doing $10 million in sales. Turns out at the end of the year they've written checks out for $7.5 million to suppliers. That's the cost of the goods. That's the value added the suppliers add. So when the stuff arrives at the back dock of the warehouse, and you get a bill for $7.5 million, that's the supplier's value added. The company then slaps a markup on top of that and says, all right, we would like to have another $2.5 million that we're going to bill the customer for whatever we think we're doing here in our business. And this gross margin is going to pay for all the costs of the business, the payroll, the rent of the building, the trucks, etc., utilities, and so forth. Now, when you look at all the expenses of a distribution business, typically as low as 50, typically 55 to 60%, 65% of all the gross margin goes for just paying for people. So that's the single largest cost. Then what you would do is subtract out all the costs of running the business, and the average industrial distributor in 1999 tax data came up with an operating profit of $170,000. In other words, they took 1.7%, kind of like the Sears story, 1.7% of the sales, $10 million in sales, down to the operating profit line, or profit before interest and taxes. Then if the company borrows money from the bank, they can deduct interest. That's just a tax convention. And then what's left, profit before tax, they pay maybe 50% of that out to the three levels of government. So now what you do is you divide the number of employees into the gross margin dollar, because gross margin is what we think our value added is for our customers, and you come up with some magic number. In this particular case study, you'd come up with $50,000 of gross margin dollar per employee. Now, if you look at that figure, what if we could come up with a bunch of productivity plays, doing it right the first time, etc., that allowed that figure to go to $100,000 in gross margin per employee? Well, then we'd be able to pay, premium wages for everybody, and we'd still be able to have a premium profitability. Now, what are different ways to, in a sense, grow gross margin dollar per employee? Well, we could say, let's just go get more sales. Instead of $10 million, let's go get $11 million in sales, but don't add any people. So margin goes up, but since headcount stays the same, then gross margin dollar per warm body goes up. But unless we're doing something different, we're all working 10% harder, and that's probably not sustainable. The second thing we could do is the sales could stay the same, but we could reduce the headcount. We'd say, look, not everybody is showing up on time and working hard and all that sort of stuff. Let's find the coasters, let's find the deadwood, let's get rid of those kind of folks, and then fewer, better people can, in a sense, do the job that has to be done, and that would increase productivity somewhat. But that's usually pretty limited. I think these days most companies are running kind of lean and mean, and most people are doing the best they can at their job, and so it's very unusual to find a company that's been so poorly managed for so long that there's just lots of dead wood around. So that means really we're left with the third best alternative, which is to figure out how we're going to grow productivity per employee, or gross margin dollars annually generated per full-time equivalent employee, that ratio. How do we grow that ratio through different kinds of productivity plays and rethinking of our alignment, working together, etc. That is going to be the big theme throughout this video. See you next module. In section 2.1, when we were talking about the average employee's expectations of an employer, right at the top of the list was a good wage. And I did refer to an average wage being 100% and maybe 7% more, 107% being a good wage. And I mentioned something about a premium wage for a job niche. And this all is touching on sort of labor markets and where do wages come from and who sets them. And I thought that if we are going to successfully create premium productivity in our company that's going to afford premium wages and turn jobs into careers, we're going to have to understand the ABCs of free market capitalism. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time in this section just talking about where do wages come from. And I'm going to start with sort of a build slide that we're going to look at. And in this slide, you're going to see, first of all, a bell-shaped curve. Now, if we did a quick survey of wages in town, wherever you are, for pick a job, inside sales, accounting, clerical position, you could talk amongst yourselves, you could look at the newspapers, you could talk to a few friends, you could talk to some people who are in the job search business, and pretty quickly you can get a feel that, well, you know, for this kind of job, an average wage seems to be X, and let's call it a 100. And once in a blue moon, you're going to find somebody that pays, you know, 20, 30% less than that, or maybe FedEx UPS pays 150% of the going wage for drivers, you know, for local delivery in the town. But you're going to find a big pileup of employers. Most, I'd say 2/3 of all employers are going to pay within plus or minus 15% of whatever the average wage is for that job niche. There's no conspiracy doing this. There are just zillions of different, and this gets to the next point, there are lots of different sellers and buyers of labor. You know, think of all the different employers in a given metro area, and they're all trying to buy, you know, labor, and all the employees are the sellers of the labor. And everybody can look at the want ads and go look for jobs all the time to try to find out what they think is best. And this huge dynamic auction, in a sense, creates a pattern or a zone for a given job niche. And the zone can shift a little bit depending on what the economic cycle is. For example, if the economy tanks and everybody's laying people off, the sellers, you, don't look for other jobs as aggressively, or maybe, you know, some of you don't try to hold the employer up as much as you can to try to get the, you know, more wages that you can. Or you could have a particular type of job, software, for example, where they could outsource the job to India, where people will work, you know, for long hours at much lower pay doing software coding. Surprisingly, a lot of jobs are so tied up in processes and lots of other people being nearby that they're not exportable. I can't, you know, barbers have to be here to do the hair, and drivers have to be here locally to deliver the goods and so forth. So there are things that can influence the supply a little bit, but the main thing is just lots of sellers and buyers trying to create a job niche. Now, if you had a big, long continuum, you know, a line where you said, okay, what's the lowest paying job you can think of, all the way up to Alex Rodriguez making $25 million a year as a baseball player, and realize each one of these jobs, brain surgeons, pastry chefs, warehouse managers, etc., is a little bit of a zone. And, you know, some are way out there and some are at the low end of the spectrum. How do you get into a higher paying job niche? And the question is, well, you know, or the point is you have to pay the entry cost to get into that job niche. For example, If you want to be a sports star, you have to have God-given talents, and you've got to work like crazy to try to develop them, to try to make it, and very few people do. We're really kind of looking in the newspaper at freaks that, just won a lottery in a sense. Statistically, people that try to get those jobs don't. If you wanted to be a brain surgeon, for example, the entry costs are a lot of education. You don't just have to get out of high school. You got to get out of a good college. You got to get into and out of a good medical school. You got to do your intern residency. Maybe it's 35 years old before you start to actually make real money. And you had many years where you didn't have a job, so you gave up wage earnings, and instead you were borrowing enormous amounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars, to go to college and graduate school. So all those things suggest there's going to be a much lower supply of people who qualify for the job niche, and they're going to charge a high price to get a good return on the huge investment they've made. If the government said, sorry, nobody can make more than $100,000, we're going to tax the rest away, there'd be no brain surgeons, because who would want to make all those sacrifices to get in a job niche where you can't make enough money to justify the huge upfront sacrifices and expenses? There are other pluses and minuses around a particular job that will increase the wages up or down. For example, you take the exact same job at a big factory that has 3 shifts, you'll find the first shift does not pay as much per hour as the second shift, which doesn't get as much as the graveyard shift. And again, it's supply and demand. Who wants to work the graveyard shift? Far fewer people. So you have to raise the wage high enough that enough people say, all right, I'll sell my soul, in a sense, to work that graveyard shift. Another thing is piece rate options. Sometimes jobs are very solo Suzuki. It's just you and the Kabanko machine. I once saw a cannery where people were snipping heads and tails off sardines, and they were all working like crazy. You couldn't believe how fast these people were doing it, cutting their things. But they were all on piece rate. They were not dependent on other people to give them stuff on a timely basis, or they didn't have to be flexible and do lots of different jobs to make certain service phenomenon happen. So if in theory a business is such that you can have somebody who does just one thing, and you can really measure that exactly and tie piece rate to it, then in theory some guys can make quite a bit more than others, depending just on how fast they work and how error-free they are. And then a last, and probably a most important but most hidden factor, is the inherent productivity or efficiency of the ecosystem, the business ecosystem you're part of. On a national basis, the average worker in the United States makes 6 times what their counterpart would make in Mexico. Now, it isn't because we're working 6 times harder, and in a lot of cases, we're not even working 6 times smarter. But we are in an environment where everything works. We have great roads, we have great electricity systems, we've got great computers, we've got great everything that's grown up over a couple hundred years, and how that grew up so successfully in third world countries, why it didn't, those are topics for another day. Just be glad we're Americans and we enjoy this incredible productivity that sort of takes care of us all. But how could we take that and apply it to our company? Because our company has an ecosystem. And if we have the right underlying rules and assumptions, and we work with the right customers and suppliers in new, smarter ways, we can increase the overall productivity or the inherent efficiency of our ecosystem, which will feed us all. So we can make premium wages, not working harder, certainly working smarter, but not just at an individual level, but in a group and a total company alignment way. And that's what we really want to focus on. Now, when you look at the global free market system, and you think, well, how many jobs are out there? I mean, there are drug pushers and there are all kinds of people. There are people that recycle the needles, for the drug pushers. So there are millions of jobs out there, and you think, where do these jobs come from? Who invented them? Well, there's a need. Somebody steps up and says, I'll fill the need, and try to get paid what I can. A supply and demand takes over. And the simple underlying rule is people pick a thing that they think they can do. They focus and do it over and over and over again until they can do it almost with their eyes closed, and they do it so efficiently and so error-free that they create more of what they're doing than they need themselves. To make it simple, you go back to the beginning of barter economy, and I make canoes and you hunt bears. I've got extra canoes, and you could try to make your own canoe, but it would take you 10 times longer and it would leak. So you're better just to keep doing bears and I'm just going to do canoes, and we have excess of surplus of what we do, so we decide to trade. And we haggle. But at some point, if we agree to do a deal, we both think we won. So free trade means both guys got a better deal. Two adults are trading surplus, and that's why they did the deal. So in a sense, free trade on a global marketplace is a free lunch. It creates productivity or wealth. But it's that simple, barter concept where you then put money in there as a means of facilitating exchange, and that simple rule has created this global free market system. So what's important now is to realize that free market capitalism is out there, and we've got to deal with it. So the punchline of this module is this: the free market system is out there, and it's a powerful self-organizing force. There's nobody in charge of it. But if we understand how it works and what the rules of the game are, then we can play to win the game and do it better. So that's what we're going to do, and that's going to be a main theme of the rest of this video, is how do we create that high-performance company ecosystem that's going to support premium wages from a happy byproduct of premium productivity. In Module 2.2, the last one, we talked about free market capitalism and where wages came from in a general sense. In this module, I want to sort of zoom in on an individual job. Let's just look at warehouse jobs in your metro marketplace, or driving truck jobs in your metro marketplace. Clearly, there are a lot of people making local deliveries. There are a lot of people working in warehouses all around the airport, the warehouse districts of your metro area. And you'll recall in the last module that I talked about if you did a quick and dirty survey, you'd start to find out that there was a range or a zone for a given job. It looks something like this, where the average wage we're going to call 100. We'd find that, so that's the 50th percentile company would pay $100 or 100% of a given average wage. And then we'd find that probably 2/3 of all the employers would pay within plus or minus 15% of that wage. So to make my math easy, a job pays $10 an hour. 15% of that would be $11.50, would kick us up to the 115th percentile. Or somebody would try to pay $8.50, and that would take us down to a lower percentile. What we really want to focus, though, on is what happens if we want to get to 120% of the going wage all the way up to 150%, because FedEx and UPS are paying their drivers and their warehouse people those kind of wages. How are we going to increase our productivity to get to that level is the big question. There are different ways of doing it. Imagine if we had 10 people in a warehouse and we took the 2 least productive people. Not saying that they, couldn't do better if we gave them a chance. Let's just be simplistic and sort of, heartless here and say, all right, let's can the 2 least productive people and say to the 8 people, do the same work that these fellows were, and we're going to give you their wages. In other words, we're going to pay the same wages for the warehouse. We're just going to divide it by 8 instead of 10. So the average guy just went up 20%. He's now getting 120% of the going wage for doing that job. And in theory, it might work if the other 2 guys were so bad that they didn't show up, or if they didn't do anything, or worse, if they showed up and tried to do stuff, they made errors. And so there's multiple times the cost of just doing it right the first time. That might work. But that still is not going to get us to 150% where we're not working harder. How do we do that? So I want to look at a number of sort of experiments or responsibilities we can build into a job, like in the warehouse, to, as UPS and FedEx have done, to get the productivity and the wages up to the 150% strata. First of all, let's imagine if we said, look, if we're going to pay a higher wage, we have higher expectations. We expect people to get here a few minutes early and work steadily all day long. And when they take breaks, they come back from their breaks. They don't abuse that, because what we're going to do if we put you on your honor is we're going to get rid of the babysitters who sort of make sure you check in on time and you get back from breaks and so forth, because the babysitters are overhead. And if we get rid of the babysitters, we can give you the babysitters' wages built into your job because you're being more responsible. Second thing is, if we start paying higher wages, we are not going to have as much turnover as we used to, because people are saying, you know, the grass isn't greener, this is pretty good. And if we have less turnover, then the people who show up know how to do it. They don't have to go through 1 month, 2 months, 6 months of kind of making errors, trial and error, to sort of figure out how to do it right at the customer's expense. We have to incur repeat hiring, training, screening kinds of costs. So maybe for the whole group, productivity goes up another 5% just because turnover dropped. Then we start to rethink our service processes. You know, we sort of flowchart how stuff flows through the warehouse, and we find out where the failure points are and the bottlenecks are and where the error points are. And we say, hey, what's going on there? And we look a little closer, and we sort of rethink our systems to make them a little smarter, a little bit more goof-proof, help us to be better at what we're doing. So productivity goes up another 10%. Then, because we start to do everything right the first time, we don't have the correction costs, so that means we can do more additional work, which supports higher productivity by maybe another 10%. I'm sort of making these percentages up as we go. If error costs drop, we're going to say we're going to get rid of the inspectors. In other words, we expect individuals to be responsible enough to do their own inspection or do it right the first time. So then we'll give you those wages because we have less inspection overhead. And you're going to manage yourselves. You may have a supervisor, but it's a lead team working kind of person as opposed to somebody running around with a whistle and a whip and that sort of stuff. Then we're going to say, you know what, we need to cross-train at all the different jobs because we have surge problems. All of a sudden, 3 truckloads of A-plus items, fast-moving items, show up on our back dock. If we can receive that all today, put in the computer tomorrow, when phones start ringing, we'll actually have higher fill rates, higher average order sizes, better customer satisfaction, as opposed to we'll ship some now and some later, creating twice the transactional cost if we just could have received it on a timely basis. But that means everybody has to be able to receive. So that gives inherent flexibility, productivity to the group. And then because we do have 0 errors, we do have 100% on-time delivery, because we do have higher fill rates because of same-day receiving, our service starts to be better, and our customers start to give us more and more of their business. Our average order size grows. We even start to get last looking a little bit more because our service is so good. Yeah, our price is a little higher, but our total procurement cost, which we'll look at in later modules, drops for the customer. So that gives us a big bump. All these things start to add up to 195% of the going productivity, or if you remember, there was one slide where we computed that there was $50,000 of gross margin dollars generated annually per warm body. If we could wave a wand and get that figure to double, so our value added or gross margin dollar per warm body was $100,000, then we could pay 150% going wages and we still would make good profits too. So these are the kinds of productivity plays that we're going to have to work on if we're going to make it happen. So I think in summary, I've got to ask the big questions. Who's interested out there in viewer land in trying to figure out how to rethink, re-engineer, redesign your job so that it can support 120% of the going wage for that kind of situation, or in some cases like that warehouse scenario for FedEx and UPS, 150%. I'm not guaranteeing that your company will or can do this. It's largely up to you, because there are these two iron laws. Free market economics sets the zone for the wages, and employers have to pay any more than what the zone says. But that doesn't mean you can't all work together to create premium productivity to support premium wages for your job niche. Secondly, as a happy byproduct, you're giving perfect do it right the first time service, because do it right the first time is the low cost, high morale, and high service value to the customer way of doing business. And so, you may be laying bricks, but if you lay the best bricks in town, you got your pride. And then how many people would say, all right, I want to be responsible for helping to do all these things, because if everybody's got to buy into this if it's going to happen. So we'll continue to pursue this over the rest of the video modules, because when you really think about it, what's your next best alternative? To stay where you are and doing what you're doing. And if you say, well, I'd like to go work for a better ecosystem, there's so few of them out there, it's better, in a sense, just to say, you know what, let's invent our own. Thanks. Assuming you've been watching modules 2.1, 2, and 3, I think the net take-home at this point is Bruce is talking about some sort of revolution here. Or maybe it's like Thomas Jefferson penning the Declaration of Independence to send it to the King of England. Like, you know, hey, we want to be free and pursuit of happiness and all this great stuff we haven't really enjoyed before. So I want to take a little time out here and talk about really the new employment contract that I'm advocating. I assume that many of you are kind of hooked on some of the ideas of, oh yeah, I'd like premium wages, I'd like to have pride in being best service, etc. But maybe some of you are a little bit wary that, your frontliners particularly wary that, wait a minute, is this one of those, yeah, I want to go to heaven, but I'm going to have to die for it tomorrow kind of things, as opposed to, well, I don't want to die for it. How about, how can I get there in some reasonable, you know, not totally pain-free, but, you know, low-pain kind of way? And on the flip side, management's thinking, well, wait a minute, you know, Bruce has promised them pie in the sky, how are we going to finance this? So I'd like to review kind of the old, you know, employment contract that most companies really have, as opposed to the new one I'm advocating in this next slide. First of all, the old deal, most companies tend to be top-down, financial management driven, and the idea is, you know, if we hire people cheap and work them hard, then we're going to make more money than if we pay more and let them screw off. But the point is that if we pretend to pay them, actually they pretend to work. Maybe the new deal is, all right, we're going to pay a lot more, but we expect to get a lot more, and we expect people to be responsible in co-creating the productivity that's going to equal and exceed the increases in wages, so the company can make more profits too. Everybody's going to win here. In the old deal, we found, or managers often said, well, I can't delegate as much as I would like to people, because first of all, they're not doing that good at the current job they are, because I'm not paying them to do it anyway. So I have to do more myself. I'm feeling very overburdened. I need to hire an assistant to help me supervise, do more top-down kind of action. Under the new deal, the idea is, wait a minute, if I'm going to pay more, I'm going to expect more, I'm not going to allow reverse delegation. When somebody comes to my office and says, hey boss, we're going to run out of boxes in the warehouse, I'm not going to say, tell me all about it, let me solve your problem for you and do your job. I'm going to say, well, I guess the objective here is don't run out of boxes. You know, go figure it out. You know, you're kind of a big boy now. I'm paying bigger wages. I expect more responsibility. And if you can't do it at this high wage, we have lots of other able-bodied people who would love a chance at doing the job. So there's that kind of peer pressure, not just on the team, but from people who would like to be on the team, that sort of make people say, boy, I really want to hang on this job. And then a third thing is, instead of being financial top-down, we're thinking about how everybody is going to improve profit power, because financial numbers, turns out, are only symptoms. And if we try to manage the symptoms, we're still not addressing the root cause of where does profit power come from. And we'll spend a lot of time talking about where does profit power come from and how we improve it. So at any rate, we now say, all right, we're proposing a new contract. The problem is, how do we get from here to there? What kind of a trip is this? And what are the steps that we're going to have to take to get to the promised land? Well, the first thing is, we have to all agree that we're in a current situation and trend that is unacceptable. And I don't know that a lot of people appreciate just how bad things might be, but we're to spend some time in future modules on just how much money companies aren't making and what it means for bleak futures for a lot of employees. But we have to agree that we could do a lot better, and we're unhappy with the current situation. The second point is that we have to agree on the fact that we want to pursue high-performance service economics for everybody. Third point is, but to do that, we're going to have some basic education. We're going to have to be fluent with financial language. So when I say PBIT, profit, PBIT, profit before interest and tax, you know that's the same thing as operating profit, etc. We have to get in touch with the assumptions we have been operating under, a lot of them unspoken and actually flawed, and we're going to have to find new assumptions that we really understand in an articulated manner. We're going to have to new productivity plays, new responsibility sharing. We're going to start putting numbers everywhere, because if we are going to progress, we have to know measurably what's going on, and measurably are our actions, our theories, our experiments giving us the new improved results we want. There'll be natural ranking from best to worst, of profit centers, of different warehouse picking, rates, of all kinds of things, of sales territories. That could panic some people, but we're going to find that that's actually a great tool for everybody to learn and get better. We're going to have to promise a certain amount of tough love, because free markets demand that. If we don't deliver for all of our 4 stakeholder groups, the best people in those stakeholder groups, they leave. They find somebody else to work with. We cannot have cross subsidies where some people are doing all the work, other people are coasting along, enjoying the show, and getting paid the same. It's possible that we may have to weed some losers to feed some winners. We may even close down some branches because they're just chronic losers and structurally, strategically not going to make it where they are. Those kind of things. But again, those I think are going to be minimal types of things if we're smart about how we can do. And really, instead of focusing on the tough part, I like to focus on the love part, where if we're smart about this, we all can be winners. So the upfront issues now for management are several. They're sort of like, well, wait a minute, Bruce. These people expect higher wages, but where's the productivity? How about if I say, look, you guys all work really hard. Do your old job, plus do some new stuff, and when we get better results, then I'll give you a raise. Trust me. In other words, we're asking the employees to be the risk takers in this venture. Conversely, the other way around is we could give everybody big raises and hope the productivity follows, and the company takes all the risk, and that's not viable either. It's going to be a shared process that we're going to have to go through to get there. There are a couple slides here that suggest if we pay more money, we can attract or turn on the talent in our people, so they get either better new people, or the old people become recommitted. And then by working on education productivity plays, we get premium output, 0.3, and that then gives us premium profitability that gives us a return on our investment, 0.1. So that would suggest that the company is going to be the risk taker here, not the employee. But I'm going to come up with sort of a middle path where everybody can share in the effort. Also, what's going to happen is when you start to measure numbers everywhere, you're going to start to find that handfuls, just a few customers are making all the money to subsidize a lot of losing customers, or some branches are enormously profitable and other ones aren't. Or some employees seem to be very, get there early, stay late, work their ass off. I mean, their personal identity and esteem is tied into the fact that, they work hard, they're the best. And there are other people who think, well, that's not the way I'm wired. I kind of show up and look around and say, well, who's the worst guy? If he's on the payroll, then if I'm just a little better than him, that's job security. So a lot of people unconsciously tend to set their sights on the least productive person or department or branch and sort of play down to that. But if numbers go everywhere, then everybody says, oh my gosh, I didn't realize we could be so much better, and I'm willing to work a little harder. And I don't expect 90% of the employees to all become sort of obsessed achievers, but I do expect that a lot of people would say, hey, you know what, I could work a little bit more diligently, systematically, and so forth. And besides, I know what's in it for me. So I would say that, in summary, I don't want you to panic and think that we're going to have a lot of pain ahead here on this road. I will say that if you want to have big gains, you've got to make big changes. Big changes usually involve big pain, transformational pain. The trick is that we have the right plays, the right assumptions. We can make big changes with reasonable, manageable amounts of pain, and all along we realize that the sacrifice is well worth it. So if you just stick with me and watch the modules that come ahead as far as the productivity plays and the underlying new assumptions and so forth, I think we can get from the old contract to the new contract at a pretty good clip with not too much stress, and it's going to be well worth it. Trust me. In this module, I'd like to talk about stakeholder balance. And first, we've got to describe what a stakeholder is. And maybe if you thought about it, you'd realize that we are all stakeholders in different kinds of communal gatherings. We're stakeholders in our families. We're stakeholders in our church if we are active there. We're stakeholders of the United States. We're all citizens of a country, and there is a commonwealth. In other words, if we all get together and cooperate, things are better than if we're by ourselves. That's what free market capitalism is. By all working and creating surplus and trade our surplus, we're actually better off than if we try to do all the things ourselves and be terrible generalists at everything. The problem with stakeholder systems, or creating commonwealth for everybody in the system, is some people may say, I'm going to look out for number one. Let everybody else do the work, and I'm going to try to take a free ride on everybody else. And if the takers start to be greater than the givers who are putting into and maintaining the system, then the system starts to liquidate, and it becomes kind of a vicious spiral. It's not a very happy scene. And you can see this happening in some third world countries as they start to collapse. Perhaps another way of looking at it is, in the long run, nobody involved in a stakeholder system can do better, do better than the whole system itself. So while we're all worried about ourselves, we have to sometimes look up and say, I've got to think about the greater good, the common good, the longer term commonwealth, otherwise there isn't going to be one. And of course we think about this from generation to generation, taking care of the planet. We're all a stakeholder in spaceship Earth, and it's going to be able to take care of our grandchildren and their grandchildren. And so we'd ideally like to leave things equal to or better than we inherit them. That's called stewardship. So let's look at the main stakeholder groups in a company. First of all, they're the employees. And if you said, notice the circle in the very middle, PAT. That does not stand for point after touchdown, but rather profit after tax. And for most distributors, that is the skinniest little number you're ever going to, can imagine. And we'll look at that later on in another module. But basically, if employees think about just themselves, they'll say, I want higher wages, better benefits, and I don't want any stress, and I want better hours, and I don't want to work as hard, etc. And this is going to be afforded from chests of gold in the CEO's office. Of course, it's a zero-sum game. It's going to take away from that profit after tax. Customers are saying, I want more service and I want lower prices. And if, of course, we give them what they want, we liquidate our profit after tax. Suppliers are suggesting what they like to do is raise their prices to us, cut back on their services and freight policies, etc., and make more money for themselves, but at our expense and our bottom line. And of course, shareholders are saying, wait a minute, I want a bottom line. I've put a lot of money into this business. I expect a return on my investment, which is what profit after tax is. So I'd like to see that go higher. So you see four groups. Really, if they were thinking short term just about themselves, they're going to eat that profit up, and there's going to be no company at all. Now what we've got to do is figure out how we're going to make, instead of having a vicious liquidation cycle, how we're going to have a virtuous expansion cycle. In other words, is it possible that the employees, by working smarter, can give customers better service value, but do it at a lower cost and get paid a little bit higher price? That would actually expand the bottom line, but it would also give customers, a value that they wanted. And then if that happened, the customers would buy more from us. If that happened, then suppliers are happy because they're selling more to us, and we're paying our bills on time because we're making good profits to put back in the business to have the working capital to pay the suppliers. And the shareholders are happy because they're saying, gee, I'm getting a decent return on my investment, so I'm going to put more money back into the business to create an expansion, which is going to be pleasing the employees because now they've got job security and even job growth potentials. So that's what has to happen. But to do that, all the employees are going to have to sign up to make a new set of productivity plays happen. Specifically, we're going to have to figure out how to measure, achieve, sell, get paid for basic service brilliance, which the entire section 3 of this video experience is about. And once we get that going, it tends to self-perpetuate itself, which would be a good thing. Now, here are a couple things to remember. First of all, you have to believe in community economics. In the long run, you can't do any better than the others. Secondly, we're going to have to get educated in high-performance distribution economics and plays. Then we're going to have to try to make it happen. And it turns out that we're not going to be able to do these great things for all customers. We're going to have to figure out one best niche of customers and tune our story for them and really own and dominate that niche. And once we've dominated one niche, if we want, we can go after another one. So just one at a time. we're going to have to expect, a personal payoff. In other words, if I'm going to put stuff into the system and there's going to be commonwealth, I expect my fair share. So the gives and the gets will balance out in the long run. Other things to remember are, on the get side, what are you going to get for what are you going to give? If you give, on the right-hand side, your heart, mind, and body wired into strategic plays and trying to grow profitability, then you'll be able to get premium pay. The company will be so effective for customers that you will have job security and job growth, because customers are going to like you so much they're going to keep buying from you and buying more and telling their friends and so forth. You're going to, in order to change your skill set, you're going to have to be able to try new things, which means you're going to fail. All beginnings are tough. Every time you try to do something, you fall on your face. That's okay. That's how you learn. So we're all going to fall on our face forward and not worry about it. We're going to make what are called good mistakes, and we're even going to get praised for good mistakes in future modules. We'll find out about that. And we're also going to work not within our department, but across departments for the service processes that cut through departments, so the whole process team is on the same page and working together, as opposed to departmental fights and scuffles that go on. And as a benefit, we're going to say, you know what? I'm on a team, and it's a winning team. It's like being on the Super Bowl team every day of your life, getting paid premium wages, and having bragging rights too. So what we want to do is keep those things in mind and hang in there and keep watching these modules, and we're going to get there. This is the kickoff. Module 2.6 through 2.12 is the financial meat of the matter. In other words, the next 6 modules we're going to try to become kind of basically ABCs of financial management fluency, because all employees are going to have to be sort of co-managers of the bottom line. Turns out we cannot achieve high-performance distribution service economics if everybody isn't caring, sharing, looking at those numbers. So open book management is a cute term, and it is a key piece of high-performance distribution economics, but it's hardly sufficient. I mean, there's a lot more that goes with it. So we've got to now start replacing sort of rumors and wild imaginations with the hard realities. If you do surveys of employees that work at companies where generally they've not shared all the general financial numbers with all the employees, you get some wild results. Let's look at some of them. I told you earlier in Module 2.1 about Sears Roebuck, where in 1993, they asked all the sales associates what they thought was going to the bottom line, the profit line, and the average answer is 45%, when in fact it was 1.7% before taxes were paid. So that number would get about halved by taxes. And what's interesting is that Sears is a publicly traded company, so in theory people could have gone and looked at the financial reports and tried to figure out what the retail sales store unit was doing. Other surveys will find that people who work for manufacturing companies typically think the manufacturers make about 40% of the total annual revenue or sales dollar in profits. However, when they survey retail and wholesale employees, the perception is that it seems to be a thinner margin, more competitive kind of business, and that those kind of companies only make 20%. But in fact, when you look at the actual numbers for retail and wholesale, after taxes, it'll be about 0.5% for those businesses that have high volume, high turnover, and thinner margins, up to maybe 2% profit after tax, a percent of sales, for those companies that have slower inventory turns, 3 a year, for example. And then most of, if not all of that profit has to be reinvested back in the business for growth capital. We'll come back to that concept in a bit. There are other sources for profit numbers. The one I've chosen, and there are about 35 different trade associations, for example, in the wholesale distribution world that actually have members gather all their numbers and send them in. The one that I've chosen is the IDA, the Industrial Distributors Association, based out of Atlanta, Georgia, serves an industry of what are called industrial supply or mill supply companies. They sell all the grinding wheels and tools and safety supplies, general sort of supplies that would go into manufacturing America kind of plants. And there might be about 10,000 of these creatures, distributors across the country. Maybe 1,000 plus would belong to IDA. And in turn, about 187 of those members chose to send in their 1999 tax data. So somewhere around 2000, the March of 2000, they said, all right, here are numbers we sent in to the IRS for 1999. And they sent them to a company in Boulder, Colorado, who run by a fellow named Al Bates, Profit Planning Group, that crunches all these numbers together and comes up with the ratios and all sorts of ways of comparing companies and so forth. And so that's the group I'm going to look at. Now, I asked Profit Planning Group if they would take the 187 members from IDA that sent their numbers in, instead of saying, here's what the bottom 75% of the performers did versus the top 25%, they could make the split more dramatic by taking the bottom 90% as a group and find what their average numbers were, and look at the top 10%, because the top 10% are so much better than everybody else, it's sort of shocking. And so I think it has good value to do that. And if we look at the numbers, here's what we found out. The average guy out there, in other words, in the bottom 90% of all the distributors, did $8 million and change, $8,102,704 worth of sales. So that's 100% of their sales figure. Turns out that the bills they paid to their suppliers for the cost of goods worked out to be about 75.2% of sales. If you subtract the difference, you come up with gross margin, or the wholesale distributor's value added. So their value added percent was 24.8%. Out of the gross margin, that's what the distributor pays all their expenses. And you can see that payroll expenses ran 16% of the sales dollar, or if you said what percent of it was of a smaller number, 24.8%, it was 64% of the margin dollars were turned around and used just to meet payroll. And you can see that occupancy for the warehouse is really pretty low. That's why they're thin metal buildings out there in parts of town where the cost per square foot is very low. And all their expenses were not that great. So in other words, personnel expense was by far and away the biggest deal. Well, when you subtracted all the expenses, the average industrial supply distributor in the bottom 90% took to the profit before interest and tax line 1.6%, or $129,000. So you think, well, wait a minute, $8 million in sales, we're not taking a lot of money here to the bottom line. And that isn't the bottom line. It turns out that if the company borrowed money from the bank, the interest they paid on that loan can be deducted. So maybe they had $20,000 in interest. And then whatever's left, they have to pay taxes. Now, just like personal income tax, corporate taxes are graduated. But they pretty quickly get to the point where on the marginal dollar, one more dollar of profit you make, you're paying about 50% in taxes to the city, the state, because you have to pay 3 levels of taxes, and the federal government. So maybe if this company was debt-free and didn't have any interest, they might have paid an average tax rate of 30% and had $100,000 profit after tax. Now, there are different ways to look at these numbers. If the company is doing 8.1 million in sales, first of all, what does that contrast, and they're making $130,000 in profit before interest and taxes, how does that contrast to traditional rumors? I find in companies that do not share any of the numbers with employees, only on a needs-to-know basis, the frontliners, after a while, maybe a year and a half later, hear a figure, $8.1 million, but the rumor is that's what the shareholders took out of the business. In other words, they confuse sales for the company with profit after tax, and 100% of it is dividended. It's excess profits that can go out of the business, opposed to maybe some of it's reinvested back in the business, because all that inventory and receivables is not financed for free. A second way, and those companies that share all the sales figures but point out it's just sales, people are thinking 20%. So that would be about $2 million went to the bottom line and 100% out to the shareholders. So the rumors are way off the mark as far as what's really going on. Another way of looking at this is if you took 100 pennies and you said, all right, we have 100 pennies and that represents our sales. Let's take away 75 of the pennies. That gives us our margin dollars. let's now take away over half of those pennies, 65% of those pennies. So boom, there goes another 15 pennies. Now we're down to 10 pennies, and we use that to pay, because the 15 we took away are for payroll expenses. Then we take away pennies for, 2 pennies for occupancy, 5 for all our things, and you get down to 1 or 2 pennies. It kind of visually gives you an idea that, this company isn't making much money at all. This is a small, fragile number. Another way of putting that profit number in perspective is to look at damage. If somebody accidentally runs a fork through a prong through a box and the stuff is damaged or bent or whatever, what does it cost the company to make that up? A lot of people would say, well, if we bought it for $1 and we have to write off $1 of wasted goods, we know that when we sell stuff, we make a 25% margin. So maybe we have to sell $4 worth of goods to make $1 of margin, gross margin, to pay for the waste. That's not the way it works. If you sell $4 of goods, you have $4 worth of related expenses that go with it. Phone calls are happening, people are working, payroll has to be met, you have to pick it, pack it, pay freight, all those things. So the better number is to go back and say, well, if we're making on $1 sales 1.7% at the profit line, 1.7 goes into $1 how many times? And you realize, my gosh, it goes in there over 50, 60 times. So we have to go get $50 of sales to pay for $1 of wasted goods. And so you start to realize, whoa, our bottom line is so small, waste really hurts us. Now, let's go look at the top 10% of the best performers in the IDA performance group. On the left-hand side, you can see annual sales for the top 10% averaged 11.3 million and change. So, that's up from about, $3 million more than the average, the bottom 90. What's interesting is look at the cost of goods. Instead of 75%, it's only 67, or if you subtract and find out what the margin percent is, the top guys have a margin percent of 32% versus the bottom 90 at 24. The difference, is 29%. In other words, 32% is 29% more of 24.8. If you look at payroll expense, you can see that the top performers are spending more as a percent of sales on their people. So pay more, get more, it looks like. But because they have such a huge margin percent, when you get to the PBIT line, profit before interest and tax, instead of doing 1.7, 1.8%, like the bottom 90 are in the right-hand column, they're doing 7.3, which is 4 times the profitability. Also, if you look at that number we talked about in earlier modules of value added per warm body, the top performers are doing $81,000 in margin per warm body, whereas the average guys are $73,000. And so if you split that difference with the employees can make quite a bit more per year, and the company still is making a fair amount more in operating profit. So you look at these two things, and what do you conclude? Well, first of all, when I look at that 32% margin for the top performers, I realize that it's coming from selling higher, not buying better. If you're an $8 million distributor or you're $11 million distributor, the extra $3 million of, quote, purchasing power is not going to give you, it's going to give you negligible, improvement on your margin dollars. So I'm going to say the vast majority of the increase in margin profitability is coming from just charging higher prices somehow. So how do you go out there and charge higher prices? Well, first of all, if you have distinctive basic service brilliance in your customer's mind, your FedEx, you unconditionally guarantee to get the product there tomorrow as opposed to the post office who might get it there, you can charge a premium. In distribution type businesses, that's a 5 to 10% premium. So 24% margin, 10% of 24 is another 2.4%. That would get you up to about 26.5%. So they could charge a little bit more, a couple points, because their service is better. Obviously, they are not going after low margin, big volume customers for the volume is vanity sake of it, where they may break even. And there certainly are customers like that. The business is a big thing. You want the contract. They think the volume's going to be good, and you bid it too tightly, and So you're really doing a lot of empty volume with no profits. They clearly don't have any of those customers in their portfolio. And it would suggest to me also that they're not taking care of small customers on small orders that cause them to lose money on every order. I mean, basically, they've decided that, if they're going to do business with a customer, they're going to make money on them. If they can't make money on them, they don't want to do business. Maybe it's those kind of customers that come to you. So it looks like the top 10% are being very selective about who they sell, and that's a big part of their inherent profitability. If you can make 4 times the profitability, the bottom 90% are saying, gee, if I could make 4 times the money, what would I do with those extra profits? And let's look at this next slide where it's kind of a total cause and effect phenomenon. If you go back to Module 2.1, everybody wanted more. They wanted more pay, they wanted medical benefits, and we figured it might cost 5, 6, 7, 8% more per year per warm body to, take care of that. Well, we then pointed out that we can't pay more unless we have more productivity per person or more gross margin dollar per head per person. So that's got to go up 5 to 8% to support number 1. But if gross margin dollars have got to go up 5 to 8%, then sales volume per employee has got to go up 5 to 8%, assuming we maintain the same margin percent. But if our sales go up 5 to 8%, we're going to need 5 to 8% more inventory and receivables. And where are we going to get the money to finance growth in inventory and receivables? So I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but the average IDA firm has got about $3 million of assets in the business, mostly in inventory and receivables. If that grows 10%, that's $300,000 of additional working capital that company needs. Where are they going to get the $300,000 to support more sales, to get more margin dollars, to be able to pay more to the employees? The answer is you got to make money, 1, and 2, you have to reinvest it. So the question is, does your company make enough profit after tax to put back in the business to finance your future? Well, I think what we are coming to is to realize that 90% of the distributors in the IDA group, and I think that's representative of distributors in every major distribution channel out there, really have very tiny, fragile profit lines. And I would say right now, certainly in '99, and maybe worse now because the country is going into an economic recession as I speak here, the profits are minimally sufficient to finance minimal growth, which is not going to give the employees what they really want long term. But if you look at the top 10% of the guys, they're making 4 times the profitability, which is the raw fuel to put back in the business and finance expansion in a virtuous cycle way that feeds all 4 stakeholder groups, so they all continue to put their extra energy in that particular distributor as opposed to perhaps your business. And what's interesting is those top 10% have done this without the benefit of all the ideas, well, possibly, but most of the ideas in this videotape. Intuitively, they understand a lot of the things we're going to talk about in past and future modules, but still, this is a crystallization of a high-performance blueprint, so there may still be a lot more room for even the best people to get better. So let's go get them. I'd like to start this module off with some questions about the money that's in your business. If you go out to your warehouse and you look at some dead inventory that's been there for a while, collected dust, maybe it's got some different color stickers on it because you've counted it 3, 4, 5 times the last 4 or 5 years. Now imagine all of it's converted back to cash. And so they're just stacks of dollar bills all over the warehouse. And you think, golly, it's a lot of money just sitting out there in the warehouse. I wonder whose money it is. And then you think about all the trade credit. You every day you're billing tens of thousands of dollars of sales perhaps, and people don't pay you for a period of time. So where do you get the money to lend to your customers? Or another question, what happens if it's time to cut checks for the entire payroll, plus there's some big bills due for suppliers, and if you don't pay them, you're going to miss important discounts. How much money is in a checking account somewhere, and whose money is that? So you start to realize, gee, there's a lot of money floating around in this business in one form or another, inventory, receivables, or cash in the checking account. Whose is it? Where did it come from? Do we need more of it in the future? How do we get it? Those kinds of questions. Well, in this particular module, we're going to do a little case study, again, of the average IDA distributor in the bottom 90 percentile group, who had $8.1 million in sales, as you may recall from previous modules. and we're to look at the money that's in the business. And the key way of looking at money in the business is an instrument called the balance sheet. Now, the balance sheet is kind of an artificial thing. At the end of a year, a fiscal year, let's assume that your company reports its numbers based on 12/31, December 31st, end of the year, calendar year is the financial end of the year. There has to be what's called a clean cutoff, and you've all been involved in the physical inventory involving that. There's a clean cutoff. They take a freeze frame shot and they say, boom, at this instance in time, how much money was in the business, and they represent that on a balance sheet. So let's take a look. Here's the average IDA distributor's balance sheet. When they did a freeze frame shot 12/31/1999, they said, all right, at the bottom there's $2.5 million in the business. In the left-hand side of the balance sheet says, well, all right, but what form was it in at that moment in time? How much it was in cash in a checking account, how much was receivables lent out to customers, how much was tied up in inventory out there in the warehouse, and all other things, trucks, office furniture, etc. And it comes up to a total of 100%. Now, at the same time, they say, okay, if there's $2.5 million in the business, whose money was it at that instant in time? And so, let me get one more thing up here. So, by definition, both sides of the balance sheet balance. The left side is saying, where was the cash when you took the picture? And then the right-hand side says, and at that point, whose money was it? And it turns out that about 25.9% of the money at that point was owed to suppliers, because they actually extend us trade credit. They bill us and we pay 15, 20, 30 days later, depending on what their terms are. It turns out for the average distributor, about 8% of the cash in the business was the form of bank debt. We were borrowing some money from the bank to sort of maybe meet the payroll, or maybe it's a mortgage on a building. Other liabilities are things like bonuses that have accrued that we owe employees, or taxes we've accrued that we still have yet to pay to the IRS. But you'll notice 50% of all the dollars were something called equity. Equity is another term for the shareholders' money in the business. So you figure 50% of the equity, or 50% of $2.5 million would be about $1.25 million. Now, if you remember, 1999's profit after tax for this average guy was about $100,000. So that means 12 times this past year's profits seem to be in the business. Now, how did that money get there in the business? Well, it turns out that equity is a accumulating number. If you go back to the beginning when the company was founded, maybe the shareholders put up $20,000 of cash, and they just had 2 employees, and it was pretty simple. And maybe the first year sales were very small, and maybe they were break even, or maybe there was a profit of $15,000. Well, they may have chose to put the $15,000 back in the company. So in addition to the original $20,000 it paid in, now it got to be $35,000. So what the equity really is the accumulation of all the previous years of profits that were made, and the investors chose to put it back in the business to finance more inventory, receivables, cash. It's called working capital to make the business go. Now, if you look at the liability side of the balance sheet and say, well, wait a minute, these people, they're not putting money in my business because they're nice guys. We're a charity case. What do they want? So, for example, you think, well, why would suppliers lend us 25% of the money we need to run our business? And the answer is, well, first of all, they're trusting that you're going to pay them and that you're going to keep buying from them, not just the same, but obviously more. So as long as you keep buying more volume every year from those guys and paying your bills on time, they love you. They're getting what they want from their soft loan to you. The banks are a little bit more hard-nosed. They're asset-backed lenders. They're saying, we're not going to lend you money unless, if you go bankrupt, we get first call on all your assets, we liquidate them at fire sale prices, and whatever we get is still enough to pay off our loan. So they actually have special contracts that allow them to liquidate the business and get their money back if things got bad. But clearly the biggest investor is the shareholders. And what they want is, if I put $1 million, $250,000 of my money in this business this year. What's my next alternative? I could get my money out. Maybe I'd put it in municipal bonds and make 5% after taxes. Or maybe I could put it in junk bonds, what they're called, high yield bonds that maybe make 10, 11, 12%, and then I have to pay taxes on that. So there are alternative investments that in theory investors could choose. So the reason they're putting money in the company is they're thinking, I choose to do this because I want to get a really good return, a fair return, whatever that is, on my investment in the company. So that's measured by profit after tax divided by the $1,250,000. And we'll come back and look at that a little bit later on. But of course, what you want as an employee is for the company to make good money and put it back in the business to support more inventory and receivables, which allow you to support more sales without stocking out of inventory. And with more sales comes more margin dollars. And if we get more productive, our margin dollar per warm body goes up, which supports our premium wages and our future. Now, in this next slide, let's talk about what happens if the company does grow 5 to 10%. Remember, if the sales are 8.1 million and they grow by 5 to 10%, they're going to grow another $405,000 to $810,000 in increase. But if you look at the assets that we need to support those sales, presumably they're going to grow too. You have more sales, you have to have more inventory and more receivables. So it looks like the assets, if they only grew 5%, would go up $126,000. If they had to grow 10%, they'd go up $253,000. Now, if assets go up $125,000, both sides of the balance sheet have to go up by that amount. So you look at the liability side and say, golly, where are we going to get another $125,000 of money to put in the business if the company only made $90,000 profit after tax last year? We could take the $90,000, put that all back in the business, but we're still a little bit short. So we go back and say, well, suppliers, would you lend us 5 to 10% more? And they will, as long as we pay them on time. Banks, would you lend us 50 cents on the dollar for clean inventory? Would you lend us 80 cents on the dollar for clean receivables? And they might, as long as there's more equity that's being put in. As a general rule, we can borrow more money from suppliers and banks as long as we make money and put it back in the business. But I'm not going to get into the mathematics of it, but right now the average IDA distributor in this report is making enough money to barely support a 5% plus growth rate. Now, what happens if the shareholders decide that they want a better return than 7.2%? And I got that figure by taking the 90,000 and divided by $1,250,000, the money in the business, what kind of return on it. And what if they would like also dividends? In other words, okay, we made $90,000, let's not put it all back in the business. Let's pay half of it, $45,000, out to the shareholders in the form of dividends. Well, wait a minute. If we do that, we don't have the extra $45,000 we need to put in the business to finance the growth rate. Well, after all, if you went to the New York Stock Exchange and you said, well, all the companies that are listed there, a lot of them pay dividends, what percent of their earnings, profit after tax, do they pay out to shareholders in dividends? A long-term average has been about 40%. If you look at utility companies, for a lot of reasons, they pay out about 85% of their profit after tax in the form of dividends to their shareholders. So that's a reasonable expectation for shareholders, is that they, on paper, would make a good return on their investment. They get a little extra income to live a good life. Of course, the employers are saying, wait a minute, I don't want you taking money out of the business. I want you to put it back in the business to finance a faster growth rate to support my ambitions, my needs. So that's a little bit of a tug of pull. It doesn't mean that we couldn't do both if we're sufficiently profitable. What if we wanted to open a new location? What do you think that does to profits? Well, it hammers them because you expense all the costs of starting the branch up and it doesn't make money, it actually loses money for a while. What if you want to buy out a weak competitor? Where do you borrow the money to buy the competitor if your balance sheet is weak and you haven't been making enough money and put it back in the business? What if you want to invest millions of dollars in electronic commerce like W.W. Grainger or Staples has done? So what if you want to take any other strategic investments that really you expense, it hurts profits, in the interest of helping all stakeholders have a better future? And the point is, with $90,000 profit after tax, the average IDA distributor can't do any of those things. So it turns out only the top 10% of the performers in the IDA report are making enough money, 4 times the profitability, to be able to do all these proactive growth opportunities that's going to give all of their stakeholders a future. So here's some important things to remember. First of all, this financial and accounting stuff is enormously complicated, and we're not even going to pretend to get into all the nuances. All we want to know is the general big picture sort of concepts. Second point is the bottom 90% of the distributors in the IDA report, and remember, only 187 out of 1,000 plus members are choosing to send their numbers in. That would suggest to me they're a pre-selected group who may be a little bit better than the rest of the group who's not sending their numbers in. So let's just say roughly 90% of all distributors who are in mature distribution channels are not making enough to survive and thrive longer term. So if you're an employee that's got ambition over the next 5-10 years, you're either going to have to find another horse to ride, or you're going to have to be part of the solution in helping the horse you're riding turn into secretariat. And when it comes to getting enough profits to reinvest back in the business, it's not going to happen unless everybody on the team understands the problem, understands the opportunity, understands the methods for getting there, and says, sign me up, let's go. So that's what we're going to do. Thanks. In the last module, 2.7, we reviewed the concept of money in the business, and we used a tool called the balance sheet to understand that, gee, if you have about $8 million in sales as a durable goods distributor, you need about $2.5 million of money in the business. And if you want to have bigger sales to feed employees' ambitions, you need bigger money or assets in the business. In this module, we're going to sort of go a layer lower and look at something called the current asset cycle to see how money actually spins through your business and identify what I call cash traps and cash leaks, and point out that it's everybody's concern to try to figure out how to preventively maintain cash traps and preventively plug certain profit leaks. So let's look at the current asset cycle here. Let's start off in the box that says cash. And what happens is we use cash to buy inventory from the suppliers. So cash sort of converts into inventory. Then you'll see a little arrow saying sales engine. In other words, the sales force and all of our marketing promotional effort is trying to get people to buy our inventory. And when that happens, we bill the customer, and so the inventory goes out of our warehouse, and now we've got something called a receivable. So the money goes into accounts receivable. Then there's another engine called the credit department that tries to get some slow payers to pay a little quicker to get the money back in cash. And then it goes around. That's called the current asset cycle, because all these assets sort of change more frequently than once a year. That means a current asset changes more than once a year. Now you see the little dotted lines and letters. These identify profit leaks and and cash traps. Let's start with, A, which is if you go out and look at the inventory, it turns out it's not all turning. Some of it is dead, and it's been dead for 1, 2, 3 years. So it really turns out that if your inventory is turning 3 times a year or 5 times a year, some of it's turning 10 times a year to offset others it's turning 0. And then cash traps often become profit leaks in the sense that someday we eventually have to write them off or ship them back to the manufacturer and pay a restocking fee plus freight. Or sometimes we damage the merchandise, and so that has to be scrapped also. So those are profit leaks. We'd ideally like to plug up the leaks, and we'd like to preventively figure out how to keep inventory dog items from coming in. And we'll look at that in future modules. When you get to receivables, it's the same thing. A cash trap would be deadbeat customers that don't pay us for 90, 120, 150 days, or worse yet, they become Circle D. They just go out of business and we don't get paid, so we have to write that off. So that's just money that flows out of the business. Again, it would be nice if preventatively we could sell the right customers to begin with who tend to pay their bills on time and not tap out. And then there's a dotted line from cash to the bank, because it turns out we set up a line of credit with the bank, so we always have enough cash to meet the payroll or pay suppliers, but the bank charges us for that. So if we could squeeze cash traps and plug profit leaks, we'd convert more inventory receivables back into cash, and we'd pay down our line, which means we wouldn't have to pay as much each year in interest. So interest cost to the bank, some of that really in a sense is a profit leak. Now, you might say, well, okay, fine, that's a nice concept, but how does it affect me? Well, the new thinking is that if we're going to create a more productive, profitable ecosystem, all these concepts are everybody's responsibility. And usually, directly or indirectly, most employees can be part of the solution or they're part of the problem. So when it comes to figuring out how to turn our assets faster on a remedial basis, fix it, or a preventative basis, everybody could have an opportunity to play in there. Now, if you could turn your assets faster, you'll find that you can then support a greater growth rate with the profits that you make. So with the current asset cycle, we can use some additional tools. Now, these get a little complicated, so don't sweat it if you don't understand them completely the first time around. First of all, there's a concept called the cash cycle, and I've now broken the universe of IDA distributors into their two piles, the bottom 90% on the left and the top 10% on the right. You notice that the bottom 90% turn their inventory on an annual basis 4.9 times. That means we buy stuff, we sell it, and we buy it again, and we do go through that almost 5 times each year. But the top 10% are getting $1 of inventory to be more productive. They're spinning it, turning it, making it go through a cycle 6.5 times. Another way of figuring this out is looking at the days that something sits in inventory. If you divide 4.9 into 365 days in a year, you get a couple of 74.5 days for the bottom 90 and 56.2 days, so it's for the top 10. Now, when you look at the days it takes to pay suppliers, if stuff arrives at our warehouse and we receive it, and we don't have to pay the supplier for 28 days, we don't really have to pay for the first 28 days of the 74 days. Now, this is sort of perverse. Why do you think the top 10% actually pay the suppliers 3 days faster? It's a conscious choice. What it's saying is they are so profitable and they have so much cash on hand because of their profitability, they can afford to pay faster if there are significant or important discounts. Sometimes suppliers will say, if you pay in 15 days, you get an extra 2% off, or you just pay the normal bill in 30 days. So for 15 days, 2% money is very compelling discount worth taking if you have the cash. But anyway you look at it, even though they're paying faster, for which they get bigger discounts and more profitability, the top 10% are still turning their inventory faster. And and when it comes to receivables, they both collected about the same. So it turns out that a buck goes through the high performers in 75 days all the way around the cycle, whereas it takes 90.6, so we have to have more bucks in the cycle for constant sales. Now, this slide is really kind of beyond the average guy in the group, but what it's doing is saying, if you look at profit after tax, you assume you're reinvesting that back in the business, but you look at the inventory and receivables and how small or big they are based on how well you turn them, you can come up with something called the Growth Potential Index. And to really just cut through all the malarkey, what this is really saying is the bottom 90% of all the distributors in the IDA report, given the profitability is so weak and given the inventory and receivables turn is so mediocre, they can grow about 6.7% a year in sales and still have the money in the business because of the profitability to make it go. But that I would call survival's edge, because what happens if there's a downturn? What happens if accidents happen? There's no margin for safety, and there's certainly no forward investing. With this profitability, you can only finance what you've been doing. You can't plant seeds that allow new springs of growth to happen, whereas the top 10% could grow at 29% a year, but presumably maybe they only grow 15% a year, and they pay out some dividends, and they're using those profits to invest, plant new seeds, or to give new growth opportunities for all their stakeholders down the road. So the important thing to remember, in the bottom 90% of the firms out there, what's going on profitability-wise is not acceptable for what you really want for your future. And the only solution is for everybody to figure out how to be part of the solution, directly or indirectly, in improving profitability, asset productivity, profit leaks, those kind of things. And the how-to solutions for these things are in sections 3 and 4 of the video. Right now we're just in section 2 talking about financial terms and so forth. Once we have the fluency, the language for understanding things, then we can get into the how-to productivity plays in section 3 or 4. Thanks. This module is kind of a summary piece on the all-important word called profit. And I think that based on what you've seen so far in the video series, you're starting to realize profit isn't a dirty word any longer. In fact, it's the fuel for growing all stakeholders' expectations out of a given company. And to give us a little bit better understanding, sometimes repetition is the mother of learning, but it also helps to look at a concept like profit from different perspectives. So I want to go through 4 different reasons or purposes the profits have. First of all, profit equals a cost of capital. If you decide you want to raise money to put into a business, investors might say, I'd consider that, but what's my expected return on my investment? And when am I going to get cashed out? I need an exit strategy someday, some way. What kind of assurances can you give me that you're not going to tank and go bankrupt and lose my investment? So let me understand the nature of this investment, because if I can't make a return, I'm going to go put my money somewhere else. You also realize that profit after tax is kind of a leftover phenomenon. We start with sales and we subtract out cost of goods and we get our margin dollars, then we subtract all of our costs of running the business, and then a profit before interest and tax, then we subtract interest, then taxes to 3 levels of government. We're left with this itty-bitty tiny little number called profit after tax, and we have to relate that to the equity in the business to basically say, all right, this year, if you got $100,000 out, profit after tax, and you had $1.2 million of money in the business, that's about an 8% return on your investment after taxes. Is that good, considering the illiquidity of the investment? You're not going to get that money anytime soon, the risk you have of having your money tied in this business, etc. So always investors are looking at the next best alternative. And if investors in your particular company are making pretty puny return on investment for a fair amount of risk, they're thinking, maybe I should sell this business. If there ever was a generous buyer that came along and was willing to pay me a good price and cash me out, boy, I'd give my poor performing company to somebody else, a consolidator. And of course, that's a little bit scary. I mean, if you're an employee, you think, well, wait a minute, I don't know that the guy who's running the company right now is the best guy, but the devil I know is better than the devil that I don't. Or if we're going to be taken over, is it going to be the Romans that are come with good roads and a law system, or is it going to be the Huns that are going to sack us and so forth? So maybe the best thing to do is say, well, let's control our own destiny, and let's try to figure out how to make this thing go a lot better. The second major reason for profits is it's a signal to the marketplace to add or subtract capacity. If there is an industry where they're starting to make obscene amounts of money because demand is exploding and supply is small and people can charge high prices, it attracts competition, knockoffs, imitators like crazy. The same thing happens with wages. If you're on the North Shore of Alaska and you're looking for people to work on an oil drilling platform, if you just raise the wages high enough, it will attract labor capacity. People will show up and say, I'll sell my soul to work out here on this platform. Also, if there are losses in an industry, for example, the steel industry has had chronic difficulties going back to the early 80s, and it's caused the industry to consolidate enormously and basically eliminate a lot of capacity, a lot of jobs, and so forth. So that's a shrinking phenomenon. Now what happens is excess profits or losses tell the free market to make adjustments much faster and efficiently than if the government tried to manage capacity in a given industry. The third main reason for profits is it's the primary source of a private company's growth fuel. If you make money, you can put it into new ventures. If you don't make it, you've got these new ventures you like to do, but you don't have the bucks to go after. If you want to grow the business 5 to 10% a year, we've seen that your assets are going to grow 5 to 10% a year, assuming you don't spin them faster, learn to turn them faster, and you should do both. But if you can grow your return on, if your return on investment equals or exceeds your growth rate, then you're able to put that profit back in the business, borrow a little bit more bank debt, a little bit more supplier debt, and so forth, and keep your boat growing, so forth. And then the last thing, and this is probably the most important from you, is profit after tax reinvested in the business is the cost of your future, your career prospects. If you do some math, let's imagine 5-year averages for the bottom 90% of the companies, where let's say they're making $100,000 profit after tax and have 50 employees on average, and they put it all back in the business. So they're investing $2,000 of profits per year per employee. But if you look at the top 10%, who's 4 times more profitable, they're investing up to $8,000, 4 times the profit after tax per employee, which is going to give every employee in that business much better career growth prospects. So the big point, of course, is we want to figure out how to become a top 10% company too, so we can seize the new growth opportunities, plant those seeds that are going to give us new sources of opportunity down the road. So I think the key points to remember are that there are 4 different reasons profits are important. And it's in our interest not to see it as a dirty word, but a terrific word. And what we want to do is make such attractive profits. Investors aren't thinking about selling the company or trying to milk the company, but rather, wow, I'm making such a great return. I want to put all my money back in there and make a bigger return on a bigger investment. And that'll help all other things go well for all stakeholders. Thanks. In this module, we're going to address the big question of what is a good return on investment for shareholders, money in the business. And part of it depends not just on economic realities and alternative investments, but also investor values. There are plenty of small business people who really don't see their job as a wealth creation machine as much as it's just kind of like buying your own customized job. I have a landscaper who's very much that way. He doesn't want to get bigger. He just wants to stay the way he is. He just kind of enjoys what he's doing, wants to survive. He's just happy doing his own little thing. And he subcontracts out, so forth, and he's got 1 or 2 employees and just wants to stay small. Those are his values. But once a business starts to get big enough that you have full-time employees and they all have expectations, you start to realize, oh my gosh, everybody in my ecosystem, my 4 stakeholders, they're human beings, they want more. But rather than seeing that as a problem, it's an opportunity, again, if we can figure out how to create virtuous cycles built on high performance assumptions and practices and so forth. So let's go look at the IDA report again to sort of look at 2 contrasting return on investment scenarios. First, we have the bottom 90% for the 1999 tax return data. If you look at PBIT, that's profit before interest and tax divided by equity or shareholders' money in the business, you get a return of 10.2%. We can guesstimate on interest and taxes that they made about 7% profit after tax. And of course, they always hope that they're going to do better. And to give you quick references, you see at the bottom of the slide that inflation, let's assume, was 2%. So you didn't make 7% of your money. After inflation, you increased your wealth or your money in the business by 5% as far as buying power. Alternatively, they could have liquidated the company, sold to somebody, taken their money and put it in municipal bonds and made about 5.35% after taxes. It's a little bit less than what they made on the business, but they have 100% free time. They don't have much risk. It's an asset you can borrow readily against. Your exits, you can sell it very quickly if you want. So there are some offsetting benefits to just putting money in muni bonds and calling it a day. Conversely, if you want to take more risk and put money into investment vehicles that could go bankrupt and then you don't get your money back at all, you could go into high yield or what are called junk bonds. And right now they're making 10 to 20%. You can put your money in Argentine bonds, because as I'm doing this video, the whole country is looking like it's going to default on its bonds, and the interest rates are 28 to 30% a year. But the market's saying, yeah, but you may get your investment wiped out and not get anything. Getting back to the slide in the right-hand column, the top 10%, if you look at profit before interest and tax divided by equity, they made a whopping 61.5% return on their money, or 6 times what the bottom 90% were averaging. After taxes, you can see their tax rate's a bit higher because they're a higher marginal tax rate. I'm going to guesstimate they made about 30% return on investment. But still, we're looking at a magnitude of 4 times better ROI. Now, I'm going to ask you some questions. Imagine you either inherited some stock in a privately held distribution company, or you had $1,000 that you could invest in some shares in a privately held distribution company. As a minority shareholder, would you be happy with your 7% return on investment in the bottom 90? Certainly you'd be a lot happier if you were in the top 90. Are you going to expect dividends from the bottom 90? They can't. Every dime they make has to go back in the business just to barely finance survival growth rates, whereas the top 10% could pay dividends also. If you went to the company and said, I'd like to sell my stock back to you, the company might say, gosh, we're going to have so much trouble trying to get more investors, we really don't want to buy your stock unless maybe we bought it at a steep discount, and since you can't go anywhere else to sell it, you kind of have to settle for whatever the majority shareholder decides they want to pay you for it, if anything at all. So that's one big question. Another question is, which one of these companies, bottom 90, top 10, can afford to expense money or invest money in new high-growth potential venture ideas? And we've been through this in past modules. Only the top 10 have that luxury of doing it. And then I would ask the question, do you think the employees at top 10 percentile companies are working 6 times harder to give those companies 6 times the return? In fact, they often have a more stress-free, interesting job because everything about that ecosystem it makes sense. It's all in alignment. And we'll have future modules, we'll expand on that concept. But I'd like to ask some more questions here in this next slide. What do you think came first? Did we get dedicated, focused, systematically, and strategically aligned employees? Or did the company make obscene amounts of profits and say, let's go buy good employees? Obviously, you have to get the employees first to create a total business model that's going to generate premium returns. So we have to turn around and change the employees first, and the profits will follow. Second question is, why don't you invest your personal time and career in a top 10 percentile company? Because presumably 90% of you watching this video may not be working for top 10 percentile companies. Why don't you just go work for one of those guys? Well, actually, they're kind of far and few between. There may not even be any in your hometown, in your industry. If you go there, they say, well, maybe we're not hiring just now. So clearly, finding these companies and trying to figure out how to get, hired on and so forth is not as easy as you might think. So we might say, well, what the heck? Why don't we just go ahead and invent our own? And that's what this video is all about. So back to the shareholder question. If you forget the freaks of nature, in other words, these privately held distribution companies that are making 30% after-tax return on shareholder investment, say, I'd like to invest in one of those. Well, first of all, they're not public, so you can't buy shares. Even the private companies who said, I'd like to invest money, they'd say, no need to, because we're making so much money. We're putting our own money back in here to make an obscene return on our own money. We really don't want to cut you in on this lucrative game, if that's okay with you. So if that's the case, wouldn't a lot of investors in bottom 90 percentile companies be satisfied with a 7% return on investment? Well, it depends on a lot of factors, and let's look at some of the other investment factors. First of all, you have to consider your reward or return on investment of 7% versus the inherent risk in the investment. If I'm going to invest in U.S. government bonds, the ability of the government to pay the interest and ultimately, give me my money back for the bond is pretty good because the U.S. government is as good as the economy it's underlying it and their ability to tax people to keep paying their interest and turn their debt over. Conversely, if you invest money in a high-tech startup where 99% of them don't ever get to be public and do really well, a lot of them bomb out. So there's a lot of risk there. So you're going to say, if there's a lot of risk, I expect a much higher return to offset the chance that I might get my whole investment wiped out. A second big question is liquidity. I may put my money in, but what if all of a sudden I have a family emergency and I need to get money for medical expenses or some other kind of situation? Well, to be a minority shareholder of a privately held company, you have almost no liquidity at all. So for that inconvenience, you would expect a higher offsetting return on your investment. Now, let's play a numbers game. Let's imagine that you've got big college bills you anticipate coming 10 years out because you've got a kid that's got buck teeth, and you do the math and you figure out, oh my gosh, I better start saving some money. So you have $1,000 that you've scraped together. Where would you invest it? Would you invest it in minority shares of your company if they were made available to you? Let's look at the sort of the risk liquidity spectrum here. You could put it in the mattress, and when I was making the slide on July 14th, 2001, you could do that and you get 0% return per year, and actually there is a risk. You know, under the mattress somebody might steal it from you. It's probably better in a checking account where you would make 1.85% profit before taxes, because that's income to you. You have to pay tax at the end of the year. Money market funds are doing a little bit better on July 14th. They gave you 3.45%, but there's a little bit more risk. In the checking account, it is guaranteed by the U.S. government, whereas in a money market fund, it isn't. You could put your money in a 10-year U.S. bond, but because it's less liquid and you're not going to get your money back for 10 years, you can sell the bonds on the bond market, but there's a switching or transactional fee, a commission you have to pay. You get a little bit higher return. So really the intent of the slide is to show you that well, you can see your company stock there. It's 10.2% profit before tax, but you could put your money in a bond of a publicly traded company that frankly has got better chances of surviving over the next 10 years and make 12%. So you would be better off putting your money there, but actually you probably would put your money in mutual funds, because the major index mutual funds over the last 10 years gave you 15% per year, but that was for the last 10. It's not going to be for the next 3. No promises there. So based on what you want to do, it would be an inappropriate investment for you to put money into a privately held company, particularly if it's a bottom 90 percentile poke-along company. Second key thing to remember is that 7% is, return on investment is a survival at best return on investment for the bottom 90%. There's nothing appealing or attractive for any of the stakeholders there. So what we need to do is work together to reinvent a high-performance company that's going to take care of all of us. That's it. Thanks.